hurting my brother, and it's going on. It's going on. It's going on. Somebody's hurting my brother, and it's going on. And we won't be silent anymore. Somebody's hurting my sister, and it's going on. It's going on. It's going on. Somebody's hurting my sister, and it's going on. We won't be silent anymore. Did you hear somebody's crossing the water, and it's going on? It's going on. It's going on. Somebody's crossing the water, and it's going on. We won't be silent anymore. Somebody wants to build that wall, y'all, and it's going on. We won't be silent anymore. And we won't be silent anymore. And we won't be silent anymore. And we won't be silent
Because this campaign is paying homage to the old and the new, we think about the then and the now of the movement. We're bridging the gap between 1968 and 2018, which is 50 years of just revolution and 50 years of activism. So we also incorporated a new part that incorporates hip hop, a little hip hop aspect to it. So they bring the old with the new. So when we get to that, we'll teach you how the words flow and go.
So your words are first, everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. Everybody has a right to live. You got that?
Got that. All right. So then the second part will be everybody's got a right to live, and then you all say to live. And then everybody's got a right to love, to love. Everybody's got a right to dream, to dream. Everybody's got a right to learn, to learn. Got it? All right.
Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. Before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to dream. Everybody's got a right to love. Everybody's got a right to learn. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to do. Everybody's got a right to live.
I think you're still on mute. I do that every time. Thank you, Becca. Hi, everyone. My name is Pauline. I use the pronoun she, her, hers. I'm one of the cultural arts organizers of the New York State Poor People's Campaign. Before our session today, we're going to get grounded in song, and we're going to sing a song together by Sweet Honey in the Rock called Ella's Song. I'm going to put the lyrics in the chat, all the lyrics in the chat, and then also a link to the movement soundbook, which you can, the movement songbook you can find online at poorpeoplescampaign.org, and also have links to it from New York State Poor People's Campaign, nyspppc.org as well. So we're gonna get started in a song. I was doing some research about Sweet Honey in the Rock, and they do this with a beat. So we're gonna try something new and different. Okay, so I know that everyone's muted. I look forward to feeling everyone singing, even though we can't hear each other right now in this moment. Okay. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes, until the killing of Black men, Black mother sons is as important as the killing of white men, white mother sons. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. That which touches me most is that I had a chance to work with people, passing on to others what was passed on to me, because we who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. To me, young people come first. They have the courage where we fail. And if I can but shed some light as they carry us through the gale, because we who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you, Pauline. My name is Ricky Hess, and I am the director of the nonprofit MR Hess Homeworks. We're a small nonprofit out of Watkins Glen. We focus primarily on suicide prevention and mental health awareness. And one of the things we like to do is we like to host community conversations. We call them Too Late for Taboo Talks. We've done them on domestic violence. We've done them on substance abuse. And we do them on suicide prevention. When the protests first started, I noticed my Facebook feed was full of anger, confusion, racism, subtle racism, as I started to call it. And I realized that we needed another community conversation on racism. I was introduced to Mr. Smith and Reverend Bell, who are both on the panel tonight, as well as Becca Forsyth from the Elmira Poor People's Campaign. And she loved the idea, and we've taken it and run with it, and we've put together this awesome panel of people, professional, personal, and we hope you will take the opportunity to respectfully ask questions, interact, and my goal is to see people become enlightened and educated. So I hope this brings that to you. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ricky. And yeah, as soon as Ricky reached out to me, I knew this was something that we had to do. Some of the main goals of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, are to build unity across communities and to face the hard truths about the evils of oppression, systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, and the war economy, all wrapped up in a false moral narrative that says we have to do things this way or be involved that way in order to be part of the world. The truth is that we live in a glorious land of abundance, and everybody's got a right to live. It is that with that in mind that we set out to collaborate with a bunch of folks from different parts of the state and talk about how we deal with racism in rural parts of our state. We wondered what we had in common and what this would look like. The discussions we've had over the last month getting ready for tonight have been pure gold. To watch us learn about each other's history and relearn our own history, it's been incredibly powerful. But before we start, we want to take a moment to ground ourselves in this moment and about what we're about to do. First, we want to recognize that the land that each one of us is occupying tonight was stolen from the people who lived, loved, and thrived on this land before we ever stepped on the shores. We recognize that these people were not annihilated, but are still with us today, being oppressed, exploited, and abused. We don't want to try to presume to name them all, but if those that are watching are familiar with any of the nations that are near you, please feel free to put that in the Facebook chat. If you don't know any, maybe this would be a good research project for you after tonight's program. Next, I want to turn it over to my sister resistor, Tanisha Logan-Lattimore, a Harriet Tubman Fellow with the New York State Poor People's Campaign, to go over the objectives of our gathering tonight. Tanisha?
Thank you, Becca. My name is Tanisha Logan-Lattimore, and I'm a member of the Poor People's Campaign in Elmira, New York. I want to tell everyone, and excuse me, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I want to tell everyone about the objectives of tonight. We hope to build unity across the Eastern Southern Tier region of the Poor People's Campaign and cross-regionally with Western Southern Tier, Central New York, and the North Country. We believe in holding conversations where people can talk openly and honestly about tough topics. We believe in having these hard conversations across lines of division and across the community. We hope to provide some suggestions for action steps and to help us all to move forward together.
Perfect. And just to go a little bit over the format for tonight's program, we have a set of panelists on Zoom that will be providing parts of their story in response to some questions we had. Each panelist is going to have 3 minutes to answer the question, and then Jamie Merkel, our Facebook moderator extraordinaire from the North Country, will field comments and questions that pop up from the Facebook audience. The panelists will then have 5 minutes to respond to any of the comments or questions that come from the Facebook community. So enjoy and engage in this program as this panel takes a look at the following questions. When did you first notice you were white? What's it like to grow up Black? What's it like to raise a Black child in this environment today? How did we get here, and what do we do next? Thank you, and please enjoy the show. As it turns out, I am also the first speaker, so I'm just going to keep talking for a minute. Hi, my name again is Becca Forsyth. I am one of the tri-chairs for the New York State Poor People's Campaign, and I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I first became aware that I was a white at a very young age. Back in 1979, a 9-year-old Becca was sitting in her 4th grade class, and the teacher was reading stories to us about colonial American history. I learned about Jamestown, Virginia in the early 1600s, where a brave Indian princess named Pocahontas was responsible for saving Captain John Smith from being beheaded by her father, Chief Powhatan. She went on to marry Captain John Rolfe and was whisked away to England, where she lived happily ever after. When they got married, she took the Christian name Rebecca Ann Rolfe, which was also my name. Fourth graders can't pass up an opportunity to laugh and giggle and pick when they see their classmate's name in a textbook. I was mortified. I went home that night and demanded that my father explain why my name was in our textbook. He briefly explained that that is where my name came from, because Captain John Rolfe was one of our ancestors. Among other things, my father explained that men back then could do whatever they wanted, and they gained their rights to use this land and the peoples as they pleased simply by landing on the continent. It wasn't until many years later that I understood this moment in history very differently. I understood that while the 1995 Disney movie didn't exist yet, I was fed a watered-down, Disneyified version of reality. At the time of John Smith's incident, she would have been 12 years old. These men weren't just settlers trying to find a new home. They were privateers who were here to make room for profit at any cost. Company men doing company work. I learned that Pocahontas was likely the first case of documented human trafficking in this country. She was kidnapped during the first Anglo-Powhatan War, where Christianity was forced upon her. She married Captain John Rolfe, the first man who successfully harvested tobacco for commercial use on this continent. This political step created an uneasy peace in this new world and gave him the opportunity to sail her back to England and say, hey, look, we can tame the savage and paint him up to look just like us. It was probably viewed as quite a coup. This process is typical in the upbringing of a kid in rural New York. They are able to indoctrinate us to accept white privilege in elementary school. This sanitized version of genocide didn't tell us about the 50 million indigenous people who were killed when we discovered this land. It didn't tell us about the Trail of Tears or the boarding schools that tortured their children. It just said that this was an unfortunate footnote in history, not that there are still 5 million Native American people being denied their land, their heritage, and their families still today. What it did tell us was that it's okay to put profit over people. It said it's okay for white men to do as they please, take what they want, and not have to apologize for anything. And when you live in a community where there was only one Black person in my high school, with no diversity to challenge these assumptions, we were taught to just accept that this was our history. It wasn't until years later that I realized the damage done and started to actively work to re-educate myself. Our next panelist is Suzanne Krull.
Thanks, Becca. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here with you all tonight on this warm July evening. I am the executive director of a nonprofit that provides a lot of survival programming to folks down here in Allegheny and Cattaraugus counties. And I'm also on the coordinating committee for the Poor People's Campaign here in New York. But tonight I'm here to speak personally. I grew up in a suburban community in upstate New York, and I enjoyed a lot of affluence and privilege. While I was aware of my family's financial comfort, I was totally unaware, however, of the degree of white privilege that I also enjoyed. My community was almost entirely white, and I didn't think about race at all until about 5th grade, when the first Black student joined our class. Even then, though, we really didn't think much less talk about race, inequality, or injustice. Now, because my immediate family wasn't overtly racist when I was young, I grew up believing in the myth of colorblindness. I found out much later on, however, that there were actually varying degrees of individual racism within my family, including some very extreme forms. After my paternal grandfather died, for example, I was shocked to learn that he had been an active member of the Ku Klux Klan. Nevertheless, I continued to live in that myth of colorblindness, believing that for the most part, racism was a thing of the past. It wasn't until I moved to a rural community here in the western part of the Southern Tier in 1998 that I began to learn that racism was not only alive, but thriving here in New York. My first experience with rural racism was within a conservative Christian church, where a Sunday school teacher spouted racist views in the classroom. My husband and I had adopted a biracial child before we moved here, and she was present with one of her siblings in that particular class. Our efforts to confront the racism only served to highlight how broadly racist views were held within the leadership of that particular congregation. We fought and fought, but eventually we ended up leaving that church just before we would have been excommunicated for continuing to speak out. At that time, the experience was just too difficult and too painful for our children. When one of my white children married a Black woman some years later, they also experienced racism here in Allegheny County. Some of it was subtle, some was blatant, and some was downright dangerous. It's not my story to tell any of those particulars, but after a few years, they relocated to a more suburban area. Eventually, they left the country and settled abroad where they feel safer in raising their biracial children. For them, the horrors of what happened in places like Ferguson made life here in the US just too unsafe to stay here. Current events continue to prove that they were right. So I've been living here in rural New York for over 20 years now, and I've learned much about racism in that time. Here, Confederate flags are everywhere. White supremacy is strong, and people of color are frequently misjudged, misunderstood, and mistreated in rural communities because of both individual and systemic racism. I understand more now about the ways in which that myth of colorblindness can be dangerous, how it can have incredibly difficult consequences of inequity and erasure. It perpetuates all of those things. I've come to understand that communities of color face multiple layers of oppression and injustice, and that racism is still a significant part of that oppression. These are just a few of the reasons why I work with the Poor People's Campaign. I also keep trying to continue my own personal education in order to be a better ally and a better friend. Living here has made it very clear that we have much work to do, both as individuals and as communities, to make the world a better, safer, and more equitable place for everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you tonight.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. That was powerful. Our next testifier is Reverend Ben.
Thank you, Becca. I am Reverend Ben Fitzgerald-Fye. I am the proud pastor of the Scipioville Presbyterian Church in rural Finger Lakes, New York. So for me, I grew up in small town America. I grew up a gay kid in small town rural America. And so awareness of identity and awareness of differences was kind of built into my genetic cake from birth. The understanding that one could be different, one could be marginalized, demonized, and lied about as a result of being different. I knew, though, even as a kid, that being white gave me some degree of privilege. I knew later that being gay took that privilege away. And so when I reflect back on my childhood, I think the thing that bothers me the most about my experience growing up where I grew up is not so much personal, but it was ultimately as I reflect back on the kinds of lies that are used to manipulate people living in rural America, the kind of lies they are told that progenitate this kind of ignorance and sort of willful intolerance. And these lies are pervasive, and they come from every aspect of life, from churches to community leaders, to people who are supposed to be responsible and in power. Rural America has essentially been fleeced. It's been fleeced for decades. It continues to be fleeced, and you can see that in the posting on social media. The powers that try to control the lives of rural Americans tell us all the time that Mexicans are taking our jobs, that Black folks are creating crime, that welfare queens are stealing our money, that affirmative action, not our lack of education or educational opportunities, is stealing our opportunity for better jobs, and that somehow your marriage is falling apart because some dude kissed another dude. Those are the kinds of lies that are being used to manipulate rural America to this day in the culture wars that we see coming from the halls of power. And while these lies were distracting us, while we were worried about invisible Mexicans, and while we were worried about Chicago coming to rural America, Walmart came into my little town and destroyed Main Street and took away all the things that made it the charming place it was supposed to be. And education budgets were slashed, and religion was weaponized, and economic inequality grew and grew and grew. And white, straight, rural folks never realized that it was rich, white, straight, powerful folks who were behind the entire scheme the entire time. And so to this day, the voices of rural America are still shouting out against minorities and foaming at the mouth about Black Lives Matter, when the reality is their biggest enemies are a bunch of white dudes who are abusing their power. That's what I learned growing up white in rural America. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Reverend Ben. Thank you so much. So the next piece is where we're going to open it up for some discussion. We're going to bring Jamie Merkel on, who has been kind of keeping an eye on some of the Facebook pages that are cross-posting tonight. Jamie, do we have any comments or questions from the audience yet?
Hi, Becca. I don't think we have any questions just yet. So for all you folks watching, if you have any questions for any of our panelists so far, please drop them in the comment section. So let's see. Karen Wickoff says, rich, powerful people intersect with racism in the enduringly powerful form of racism. Let's see if there are any other comments or questions. So any reflections, feel free to drop it in the comment. And again, if you have any questions for our panelists, please drop them in the comment section below. Not seeing any more questions coming through yet, so we have a few more minutes that we have allotted for you all to ask questions to our panelists. So please put that below if you do have any questions. Okay, so we have one question from Margaret Gayford. Margaret asks, what do you think organizing can look like in predominantly white rural areas?
That is a great question, isn't it? Like, that's one of the whole keys to what we're all doing here, I think, tonight, trying to figure out the answer to that, because that is a challenge. The rural areas are way more spread out than they are in the cities. We don't get those kind of like liberal hubs like you get sometimes in cities. Does anybody on our panel have any suggestions or ideas about that, other than having open community conversations like this one?
For us here in the western part of the southern tier, organizing means a lot of one-on-one conversations. It looks a little different, but the content is the same. So it's just sharing whenever you have an opportunity.
I think there's also a part of that there's something we call gracious engagement, which is sort of speaking to folks one-on-one, but understanding that in white America, right, a lot of folks are learning a new language. So it's not just that we're organizing for political purposes, we're kind of challenging and restructuring culture. And so we sort of have to leave space for some grace, for some mourning, and for the kind of transformation that comes from, number one, feeling safe, and number two, being allowed to screw up, because we will screw up as we try to make this right. So I hope we can approach it both from an organizing perspective, but also from kind of a cultural transformation perspective.
I see a powerful comment in the chat being dropped by Barbara Smith. As a Black lesbian, I understand the point about homophobia causing a loss of heterosexual privilege, but being gay does not erase white privilege. I can kind of see what she's saying there. Yes, you absolutely have to deal with a lot of the false narratives as a gay man in rural New York. Absolutely. But what do you feel? How do you feel about that statement?
I don't disagree with that statement. In fact, when I was entering the ministry, nothing disqualifies you from ministry like being gay. And so when I walked into a building, the only thing people knew about me was that I was a white man. And so more often than not, I heard comments about, thank God you're not a woman. And, you know, so I think you're absolutely right. I also think, though, that when the time came that I would pronounce who I was, that privilege was greatly diminished. And my voice became less powerful and less heard. So I don't disagree with that at all.
Great, thank you. All right, Jamie, is there anything else that I'm missing that we should pop on before we go to the next testifier?
Yeah, so now there are quite a few questions rolling in. So I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them, but let's see. Kirsten Malone asks, what actions can I take if my voice is not loud enough?
I think that's an awesome question, and that's one of the exciting pieces. Stay tuned, because that's something we're going to talk about at the end. We have a great list of what's next. What kind of suggestions do we as a panel have? But there's still room for more in this discussion, because obviously what we come up with isn't the whole answer. We would certainly encourage other folks to get engaged with us and help us to see the holes when we're all done. If you see things that we didn't suggest that we should have suggested, please make sure we hear about that. Absolutely. All right, well, we're off to a great start. I am going to lead us into the next set of questions. The next question is, what's it like to grow up Black? And our first testifier knows all too well, because at 19 years old, he is not able to join us tonight because he's at work. So he was kind enough to make a video with us. So we're going to share that video really quickly.
Hello, my name is Raymond Logan-Polite. I am Tanisha Logan-Lattimore, son number 3rd out of 8. And today I'm going to talk about how it is for a Black man in today's society about racism. And that's one thing about me being Black. Police, that's the most scariest thing for a Black man in today's society. You know, when me and my friends ride around, you know, we ride around with teenagers, you know, we want to do, like, we want to go to parties, you know, we want to go swimming, we want to do things, you know. And I'm not going to lie, in today's society, police, it's like they have a hate towards us. Like, they always follow us. And, you know, and us, you know, we thought police was supposed to protect us, you know. And if anything, we scared of them more. We are really scared of the police. For me being a teenager, you know, it's just a lot. You know, they follow us. You know, when they pull us over, they're so rude to us. And mind you, we're not doing anything illegal, anything nothing like that in that manner. You know, it's just a lot. You know, in today's society, it just really, really bad. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, you know, they just look at us like we're villains. Like all Black people are criminals. You know. Like, as you can see, I have a job. I go to work every single day. I don't bother anybody. I don't do anything with racism. I'm not racist to anybody. You know what I'm saying? My mom always taught me, you know, love everybody. It doesn't matter. Beat them with kindness, you know? So, you know, it's really bad. And, you know, it's not going to change. But, like, another thing is, you know, me personally, dating a white girl, you know, their parents might not like you and don't even know anything about you, automatically hate you because of the color of your skin, you know? There have been certain times when I've been in households with a female, and, you know, I'm meeting their parents and everything like that, and they basically just don't like me because of the color of my skin, you know. And mind you, me being a Black man going to a white woman's house, you know, I have to come in a respectful manner. So can't be wearing baggy jeans, can't be wearing sneakers, and I gotta come respectful. And that's another thing, you know, you should come as you is and as you are, but, you know, you gotta technically do stuff like that. You know, and it's just a horrible thing. And another thing is me working, because as you see, I work at White News. A lot of people, because, you know, I'm dealing with customers on a daily basis, and it is points at certain times where the customers are racist. You know, like, cause, you know, I will work with a certain white lady, you know, and I will hear a person talking to them with so much respect, so much kindness, saying thank you, have a good day, and then when it comes to me, you know, they can just talk any certain way in a disrespectful manner. Now, my first reaction is to, you know, talk back in that same manner talking to me. But mind you, I'm at work, I have to be respectful. So, you know, my mom always taught me, you know, love everybody. It doesn't matter, beat them with kindness, you know. So you know, it's really bad, and, you know, it's not gonna change. Like, racism is getting out of hand, you know.
That was a powerful testimony.
Hello, my name is
Whoops.
Raymond
Hold on one
Logan-Polite. I am
second,
Tanisha
sorry.
Logan-Lattimore.
There we go. So that was a really great testimony from Raymond. We're really glad we were able to capture that. The next testifier is Mary Kay Diakite.
Hi, my name is Mary Kay Diakite. My husband Yuba is from Mali, West Africa, and we have a daughter, Sabu, who is 10. Sabu has given me permission to share her stories with you. 5 years ago, we left our life in the Bronx and moved to the Southern Tier. From the time she was born, Sabu had always lived in a diverse neighborhood. Our community was Dominican, Mexican, Puerto Rican, West African, and Caribbean. She attended a Spanish-only daycare her first 3 years of life, had 2 years of English pre-K, and then attended a French immersion school for kindergarten in Harlem. This all changed when we got to Horseheads. It was a completely new experience for her not to be completely surrounded by people who look like her. Not long after we moved and she had started to attend her mostly white school, she came home, crawled into my lap, and said, "Mommy, white people are exhausting." From day one, she has faced racist, ignorant comments, and each time they go low, she goes high. I can remember a time when she came home from daycare, all upset because the teacher decided to Google the kids' names and tell them what they mean. She got to Sabu, found nothing, and reported that Sabu's name doesn't have a meaning to the whole class. Of course it does, and Sabu knows that it means hope. I reminded her of the significance of her name and of who she is. Then there was the time the after-school program gave the kids the assignment of making a Christmas elf that looks like them. They were given choices of construction paper to use. Sabu and her friend were pretty upset when they realized they could not complete the assignment. They marched right up to the teacher and asked, "How do you expect us to make an elf that looks like us when there's only pink and white paper?" They were told to go find a brown crayon somewhere. Then there was the time at camp. Sabu was the only brown kid in her cabin. One girl built a fort around her bunk bed and invited everyone in. She was told she was not allowed and returned to her bunk. Then her white friend went to go into the fort and was told that she was not allowed either because she had touched Sabu. Sabu felt bad for her friend and knew that it was all because of her color. I asked if she wanted me to say something and she said no. When I picked her up at the end of the week, I noticed a girl helping her with her luggage. Come to find out that this was the very girl who hadn't let her in the fort. It turns out that by the end of the week, everyone was tired of how mean she was, and she was left with no friends. So Sabu stepped up and decided to be her friend. From whispered comments, "Why is she going to your house? She's Black," to kids trying to define her identity for her, to random old men in Tractor Supply trying to touch her hair. She has already faced a lot and provided a lot of education along the way. Thanks for listening to her stories.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Mary Kay. Our next testifier is Jackie Council.
Good evening. My name is Jackie Council. I am pronouns she, her, hers. I'm the founder of BU, Women's Empowerment Organization in Elmira, New York, and the health chair for the Elmira Corning NAACP. Tonight, though, I come to speak to you on my personal journey of growing up Afro-Dominican in rural America. My journey started at a young age in rural America, being brought here through adoption to a small town in Northeast Pennsylvania. from the Dominican Republic. And I was raised by a middle-class family, my mother a nurse, my father a truck driver. We lived on a farm where I could roam freely. Our nearest neighbors were 3 miles away, so that's how rural we were. I was one of the only people of color in my community and one of the only people of color in my school. I was viewed as just Jackie and not one of those people. Kids would touch my hair, marvel at my white teeth, touch my smooth skin because I looked like the people on MTV. My first blatant experience with racism was being called the N-word in the 1st grade. Then in the 2nd grade, a white male student spit on my face and I stomped on his foot. And I was made to flip my card, go to the back of the line, and lose recess time. I knew then that I would not get the same treatment when things went down. Then, as I grew up and went into high school, I was constantly getting pulled into the office for dress code violations. And at one point, the school guidance counselor came to me and said that the way my clothes fit and the way my body language was distracting because I had an exotic look to me. This brought a lot of issues, self-esteem issues. And it wasn't until I grew up and went out into a large city that I realized the amount of covert racism that I experienced in my community. And I realized the amount of blatant racism I experienced. But it took me going out into the world to understand what I had experienced, because in my community, it just was what it was. I was just treated like Jackie, and I was reminded that I wasn't one of those people. So I had a conversation with a friend today, and he said that in this culture, the rural culture, growing up in rural America as a Black person, as children, we learn to survive by either being funny, being good at sports, or really smart. And sometimes we learn how to juggle all three in order to survive in rural America as a Black or brown child. So I believe to this day, this still holds true. And I want to thank you for listening to my story and being able to share my experience with you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jackie. All right. So that was Raymond, Mary Kay, and Jackie talking about what it's like to grow up Black. We're going to turn it back over to Jamie. What kind of comments and questions do we have?
Yeah, so while folks' reflections and questions are rolling in from this section, there's one question that I'd like to pose from Karen that says, as a moral fusion movement, what can rural communities teach urban communities regarding racism and organizing? What might rural communities learn from urban communities?
That's a good one. Do we have any takers?
So I guess I will say something here. The one thing that rural communities can learn is the diversity aspect. In urban communities, even though there are urban communities that have a lot of segregation, there's a little more openness. There's not such a closed-minded approach to things. So when somebody is there to have the hard conversation, ears open a little bit more and hearts are open a little bit more, because I think there's just more diversity, right? In rural communities, you have a lot less diversity, so they internalize it, they take it personal. But I think that's just something that you can learn, is that to have more of an open mind and an open heart when it comes to these discussions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, that was definitely an issue for me growing up. Just there weren't Black people around. There was one Black kid that went to my whole high school, so we didn't have the opportunity to really learn. So yeah, that's a great advice, Jackie. Does anybody else have anything else they wanted to add to that before?
I wanted to add to that the difference in camaraderie. If people have, a thought or, want to make change, you have to get with like-minded people. And in more urban places, obviously, there's more numbers. And if people are feeling the same way, then those numbers get together and try to make a movement. And obviously that's, you know, a little harder in rural areas, but it can be done. And that's something that we are trying to do and trying to shine a light on. And, you know, I apologize, I can't start my video for some reason, but this is Tanisha Logan-Lattimore. But it's just, you know, those are things, if you have a voice, find other people that are trying to, you know, speak as loud as you are. And the more voices, you know, the more people come together, change can be seen.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. So another question here from Patricia Rodriguez. Patricia asks, any opinions or thoughts about primarily white-only groups, Surge, for an example, doing anti-racism work versus groups of Black, Indigenous, and people of color and white people working together collaboratively, and any recommendations on how white people can call in Black, Indigenous, and people of color?
So I think one of the important things for us to do is to build relationships, because too often, especially those of us who are white, we come into meeting spaces in all of our privilege and our supremacy, and we function with all of that in full force. And so for predominantly white communities or white organizations that are, or groups that are organizing to do this work, we need to build relationships. We need to listen and uplift the stories of those most directly impacted. So when we're talking about race, that would be people of color. We need to educate ourselves and re-educate ourselves about the history that I think it was Becca mentioned that we did not learn, or that we learned blatantly falsely. And then we need to also know when to be quiet and step back and be led by those who are experiencing this oppression and injustice on a daily basis. And I think that goes a long way to helping us build a fusion movement, because we're really building relationships.
You're here. Absolutely.
Becca, can I weigh in?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
So I was having a discussion recently about this kind of issue, and I guess I have a little bit of a problem, I guess, with the predominantly sort of white groups who do this, only in the way that there is a tendency among super progressive white folks to kind of out-woke each other, right? So to see who can be the most progressive of the progressives. And so sometimes I think that there needs to be a little soul searching in a lot of progressive movements about how much diversity makes us stronger as a movement, right? So diversity is ultimately the power of progress. So without diversity, we can only be progressive to a certain point. Diversity itself is the fuel of progress. So I really hope that as we go through this kind of strenuous period of self-examination, that kind of all white organizations, churches too, by the way, brothers and sisters, take a long, hard look at how much better we could be if we became the diversity that we preach about.
Absolutely. That's beautiful.
And we have a question for Jackie. So let's see. Gianna asks, one thing that you said, Jackie, that struck me was, quote, just being Jackie, not one of those people, end quote. I've heard others talk about the difference between growing up Black in Northern New York versus moving here. Do you or anyone else on the panel have advice about whether we could or should have different activism or interventions for those who grow up in Northern New York versus move here?
That's a good question. I think that there's a lot of healing that needs to be done for people who have lived here their whole life. They are because the amount of racism we've experienced from childhood is huge. And so I think a lot more healing needs to be done. So those spaces in our rural community where we just talked about the all white movements that are happening, and the out woke white people, the white people out woking themselves. So that's a place where allowing us to come in there and just holding space for us to be able to share our experiences, people having those conversations in our community with us about what we've experienced without internalizing it and going on the defense. I think those are conversations that have to be held in our own communities where we were raised. Definitely, there's a lot more culture to learn for those of us raised in rural America, in rural upstate New York, anywhere in rural America as a Black person, because a lot of times what we learned is what we learned in the history books, where I feel like in the city you learned a lot more and you were exposed to your culture, the music and the food, and you had easy access to it, to the jazz clubs and all those things that happen in the city, and we have a different Black culture here in our community, but I do think that there is a difference in pride and in understanding. So there is a little bit of a different approach that we kind of just phase in. So yeah, definitely there is a different approach, but the same all the way around, I would say.
That was great. Thank you so much, Jackie. I just wanted to come to a point here. Jackie had mentioned about education. I had talked a little bit about the false education that I had when I was growing up. We have a comment on Facebook: a quality education would introduce all students to the significant historical, social, and cultural impact of people of color upon the U.S. and globally, wherever they grow up and go to school. I absolutely agree, and I think particularly here in Elmira that is coming to light with the fact that we're about to spend $68 million on a freaking stadium instead of textbooks for our children and some educational resources. So I just had to throw that in there because I'm so mad about that stadium I can't even see straight. Thank you so much, everybody. Let's go to the next set of questions. The next set of speakers are going to talk about what it's like to raise a Black child in this environment, or be a Black child that has been raised in this environment. Absolutely. We're going to start out with Tanisha Logan-Lattimore.
Hi, everybody. Once again, my name is Tanisha Logan-Lattimore. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am the mother of actually 8 Black males. They range from age 23 to 3. And in today's world, it's really scary. It is really, really, really scary. Because my children, before they even open their mouths, they are judged by their color, by what they have on, and what environment they may be in. And it's very frustrating. And I am a mother bear. My older kids hate it. My adult ones hate it, but you have to be. We live in a world that unfortunately mean them no good. And it's, as you see, it's getting worse as of late. As you hear of a young Black male being hung from a tree almost on a daily basis. And so I actually count it a blessing to be able to see and hear and talk to each one of my 8 children on a daily basis, because I am afraid for them. Like I said, I have all males, but I do have grandchildren, and they're all girls, and they are from mixed races. And so they are also, I've seen friends that are from mixed races that deal with racism. So it's just a scary time, but I instill in my children to love everyone. I instill in my children to be bold, but be respectful. And I cover them with prayer. At all times. So there's nothing that we can do until the system is changed. No, I take that back. Yes, there are. We're doing something right now. Having the conversation, getting those myths out of the way, and showing, as some of the panelists said, what they were taught was not true. And knowing that, and, just embracing that. Don't, when you see one of my sons walk down the street, go to the other side, that hurts their feelings. They have feelings too. And that is what I want my children to know, that they are loved, that they are just as important as the next person, to do not have fear to interact, do not have fear to speak up for yourself, to yes, go and work, be productive in your community, and yes, kill people with kindness, because they will, those that grew up with those isms, that, they're all thugs. When you say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, I'm from down south, and it's ingrained in me to say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, I will always do it. And I have taught my children that. I cannot teach, what the next person in their house will do. I just will be held accountable and responsible for mine. And so I just ask, when you see a Black male, throw all those assumptions away. Just, don't fall for the okie doke. It is a new time, it's a new day, and they are just as human as you are. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Don't fall for the okie doke. That's right. All right. The next testifier we have up is Mr. Herb Smith, who is raising 4 children in this crazy time. Herb, can you tell us a little bit about what it's like for you to raise Black kids in this environment?
Hi, everyone. My name is Herb Smith. Actually, all 4 of my kids are grown and moved out already, but raising them was always scary and always nerve-wracking, basically, especially during school. I have three girls, 1 boy, and it was particularly with my son that I always felt was targeted in school, because he's very articulate and he's also challenging. He will challenge you because he's well educated and very verbal with his knowledge. So a few times I had to go to the school and have a talk with the teachers, the guidance counselors, and the principal as well, in order to inform them that the way that his mother and I were raising him was to keep him in a certain space and place. And we didn't want him to be taken out of that space and place. In other words, encouraging them, and this goes for all of them, but my son seems to have been more targeted than my other kids, my daughters rather. So my thing was to teach them that they can be anything they want to be, do anything that they want to do, as long as they put their mind to it, as we all teach our kids. But I went a step further in explaining to them, whenever they wanted something, how to go about getting it, how to go about doing it in order to instill value in them. I wanted them to know that they serve the purpose, and that not to allow anyone to tear that purpose down, because there are going to be challenging times. There are going to be people who are going to attempt to detour you off of your path. And all 4 of them, I can say, have listened, and they're doing very well right now. But in today's time, it makes me very nervous, because this is their real first experience with racism. This is their real first experience with the way that things are going on in the world today. And so for them, it's new. Even though they're in their late and mid and early 20s, it's still very new for them. Then on top of that, I have grandchildren who are used to being able to go outside and roam around in the neighborhood free. And it's not really safe to be able to do anything like that anymore. And it's scary, and they don't understand. Now they're ranging from the ages of 9 to 14, actually 7 to 14. And they really don't understand that it's not safe to just walk through people's yards. It's not safe to just talk back to people or just be so open with people anymore. You have to be very careful, and you have to watch what you say and watch where you're going and pay mind to each other. So I stay in communication with all of them. They all don't live here in Elmira. Only one still lives here. One lives in California, one lives in New York, and the other one lives in Atlanta, Georgia. So I pay very close attention to what's going on in their lives, and I talk to them on a regular basis, and instill and continue to instill in them their greatness and their worthiness, and so that they know that they have value and that they serve a purpose. And I believe that this is something that we all need to be instilling in our children, including the white race, when you're raising your children, that we are all equal, that we are all one, and that we all serve a purpose, and we're all the same in God's eyes. And that's really basically it. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to get on and speak.
That was great. Thank you so much, Herb. We appreciate it. The next testifier we have is Natasia Reynolds. And Natasia, I think I muted you. I think you're the 607 call. Are you there?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Hi. My name is Natasia Reynolds. I'm a student at Elmira High School, and I'm also one of the organizers of the March on June 5th. Today I'm going to be talking about my personal experiences as a child going through racism. I can't say that I've experienced racism as much as others, but I have experienced it. During a time that I went through racism was during school. It was actually this year. It was in geometry class. Our new teacher was going through names, and he gets to my name and he goes, he looks at me and I say, here. He says my name, and then he looks at me after I say here, and he says, isn't your name Shaniqua? I said, no. He says, are you sure? I said, yes, I'm very positive. He said, well, don't you work at McDonald's? And he said it with a little attitude. And I mean, I got a little offended there, and I said no, and I said no. And then he just goes out his way, he leaves, and then he just walks up. So now it's not the first time I've experienced racism. Like, I've been called words such as the N-word, I've been called brownie, words towards my color, the color of my skin. Many people have tried to make me feel bad about my skin color, but I just ignore it. And I just want to say that racism is also a hard topic for youth and adults to understand and to fully understand it. And I feel that you should not let that discourage you from what you want to do or what you want to be, or let anybody's words discourage you. And I just want to say thank you guys for listening.
That was great. Thank you so much, Natasia. Natasia, Herb, and Tanisha talking about what it's like to raise a Black child in this environment today. And yeah, it looks like we have a really strong question here. Jamie, do you want to take that?
Yeah, which one are you talking about?
In the Zoom. In the Zoom
comment? Oh, in the Zoom. Yep. Let me come on in. Okay. So, yes, so the question is, my question as a teacher in a rural, mostly white school, what is the best way to deal with the obvious in a classroom when one child is the only child of color? I have also been brought up with the colorblind mentality. I've always strived to treat my kids in class equally, but when another child comments, well, she will know all about this, referring to Harriet Tubman, she's Black. What is the best response and ways to steer the conversation? I've never had any training in how to handle these discussions. Any suggestions?
Can I answer that?
Go ahead.
Hold on 1 second. Let's do Ramitha and then Tanisha.
Okay.
Okay. So I was a public school teacher. I was one of the few people of color in a predominantly white school. And I have a very rich ethnic upbringing, maybe you would say. So what I did was, whenever students said anything like that, I always turned the tables around. If they said, oh, that's a strange name, I would say, well, you know, in some country in Denmark or wherever where they speak a different language, your name Alice sounds strange to them. And so if someone said, oh, she should know everything about Harriet Tubman, then you might say, oh, because you know everything about some other, prominent person, white person. So it's always like turning the tables around and saying, oh, if you think that they should know this, or their food is strange, or their name is strange, then how do you think other people see you? Because you want to change that all white lens that they're looking through. So you want to give them a different perspective. So that's what I have always done.
Thank you, Ramitha. Tanisha, did you want to respond to that question also?
Yes, I would say to just be all inclusive. You don't want to have a person to feel awkward or feel like they are separated from the group. Yes, you may obviously see it, and there may be other people, and of course that person of color obviously sees it. But then there may be other people that are colorblind or just sees another person, especially depending on the age group. If they are babies, kindergarten, first grade, whatever, those are the perfect opportunities. And because I own a daycare center, and I get them very young. Everything is all inclusive. Don't make them, yes, make a child feel special, but don't make them feel different. So those comments like that should be shot down quickly. And I like the way Ramitha said it, turning it around slightly. Not to be adversarial, not to, do you know what my teacher said? That kind of stuff. But use that as a learning point, because you as the educator, don't miss your mark. Don't miss your opportunity right then to make that child feel included in your class. It may be you that's colorblind, but not everybody. And it's your job, because those kids are looking at you for direction and correction. So use those times to do it right.
Absolutely. Perfect. And Jackie, you had put a comment in our comments. Did you want to also respond to that?
Yes, I would. So I just wanted to comment, first of all, in educating, I know a lot of people have been raised with the I don't see the colorblind mentality, or not seeing color. And to me personally, that is a really big pet peeve, because it's okay to see color. It's really okay to see color. And I say that all the time. I say, I worked really hard to be comfortable in my skin, and to be proud of who I am, which is a Afro-Dominican woman. So it's okay if you see my color. And once you're able to see my color, then we can move forward and have those discussions and educate each other. Also, I would encourage you to reach out wherever you live, because a lot of times there's diversity training available. I know I worked in the city, the Elmira City school system at one point, and we had diversity trainers come into the school because of certain issues that we had. So reach out as well, and there is training available for that.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. Reverend Bell also wanted to step in here for just a minute. We haven't heard from him yet. He's not one of our panelists tonight, but we're happy to have him here anyway. Reverend Bell, what do you have to say about that question?
Well, one of the things as an educator, I think just as we have many ways of doing mathematics, for example. Though in education we're always teaching for what's being asked of us. It's also important to kind of stretch that so that when you have those kinds of situations, your creativity can bring all of the children into learning that's just not not just the learning that has been slanted toward white culture, but to include Harriet or include others. Well, why not have the dominant class also engage into into learning beyond what they, what they're merely asking, so that they can understand that part of education is certainly not necessarily about rote memory as much as it is about learning how to think and learning what it means to be human in humane environments. And so, we can work on methodology of engaging students beyond what is being asked of us by the state standards and so forth. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And Reverend Ben also dropped a note in here, diversity is God's gift to creation. I absolutely agree with that. And I think we need to celebrate every difference that we find in people, because that is just such a huge blessing that we have, that we are able to have those differences. And so, Jamie, I apologize. I'm sure we probably have a whole lot more great questions that came out of that segment, but I think we've already kind of gotten through our comment time for this one.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
We'll come back and answer some more in a minute. All right, so we're going to go on to the next question, which is, how did I get here and where do we go next? And we are going to start out with Ramitha Pershad from St. Lawrence County, New York.
Hello, my name is Ramitha. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I live in Colton, New York, and I'm on the leadership team in the North Country. I'll just tell you briefly where Colton, New York is, for those who don't. It's 150 miles straight north of Syracuse. It's right along the Canadian border, the border of Canada, at the St. Lawrence River. The St. Lawrence River is the fourth coast of the United States. And Ogdensburg is on the west, Messina's on the east. So that's where I'm located. I grew up in South Africa in the time of apartheid. Segregation was blatantly the law of the land and was justified using the Bible and the Word of God. So coming from there to the United States, the land of the free, where you could be anything that you wanted to be, I was not expecting to find racism. Initially, when I arrived in 1984, we were in Virginia, and my white friends there warned me about racism. So we lived in a college town, and we had a large international population. So I was pretty much sheltered from the racist elements in the area. And then we moved to New Orleans. There also, I didn't experience much racism because it was a similar environment. I had international friends, and so I didn't, but also New Orleans had a little bit of a different environment then. And also I grew up, I lived in predominantly white America, basically. So while no one directed any comments to me, they might have thought it, but I didn't hear about it. And then I moved to upstate New York a little more than 20 years ago. And here again, when I came up here, my ex-husband was at the local university, also a international community associated with the college. And I started teaching at a local public school, and one of the few people of color there. And I think there might have been 5 students of color in the entire school. So that was where I first experienced racism. A student had written the N-word on a desk. The students in my class were horrified. They said to me, "Ms. Polite, tell us who it is. We'll take care of him." And so then I think I was also a little bit isolated from comments, and I didn't hear too much. But then now I am an adjunct at the local college, SUNY Canton. And here now I experience much more racism. The dean of our school is a North Country white male, and I see a lot of prejudices in this environment. From not being offered a full-time position, whereas I see other white males moving up. Also, I'm in the School of Engineering, so as a woman of color in the School of Engineering as an engineering instructor, I would check a lot of boxes for our accreditation. And in spite of the accreditation group telling us that we need more diversity, he refuses to give me a full-time position. And I see other white males rising up and becoming full-time instructors. Also, he has, when I did get a full-time position once, and he just simply went and told everyone to take over my classes, which I thought was inappropriate, especially since the position of an adjunct generally is someone who is teaching, has a full-time job, and then they do this teaching on the side. So here I have, at the college level, I have experienced, I would say, most of the racism in the North Country.
Great. Thank you so much for your testimony, Ramitha. We really appreciate it. The next, we're not saving him for last on purpose. He's saving the best for last, right? Babatunde is our next testifier. Hold on one second.
I always forget to mute my mic. Good evening, everyone. This is Babatunde Ayenfadun, Tunde for a lot of people. I am the coordinator for the Diversity Center at Corning Community College here in Corning, New York, and I live in Horseheads, New York, and I've been living in Horseheads, New York for the last almost 7 years. So where I started, my family is originally from Nigeria. We moved here, my mom, dad, myself, moved here when I was 1, so I've been here since 1981. For most of my childhood, I was surrounded predominantly by a Nigerian community. My parents were very religious. We went to an all Nigerian church. All of their friends were mostly Nigerian music. I went to schools in Brooklyn. We moved to Brooklyn, by the way, excuse me. So while in Brooklyn, we were put in a predominantly Black area. There was just sprinkles of white people in the surrounding areas. So you moved to like other areas like Cobble Hill, parts of Brooklyn Heights were white. So I mostly had pretty much all between from my young age to high school. Before high school, it was all Black friends, Black girlfriends that I had. And mostly exposure to a lot of white community was through TV. And then when you're going into Manhattan, white police officers, so on and so forth. So I had the opportunity to go to boarding school for high school. And I went to boarding school at a school called Wyoming Seminary in Kingston, PA. It was right outside of Wilkes-Barre. And that area, if anyone knows, is all white. There are in Kingston. I don't know if I can even count how many black folks that I met while in Kingston. Wilkes-Barre had a little bit more black people, but I would say for me, the realization of racism was more understanding the dynamic of kind of the overt and overt racism, more of the latent racism that you see up north. Because during social studies in junior high or in my history classes that I got taught by my mostly white teachers, you learned about the southern racism, how overt it was. The Confederate flags, burning the crosses, and me being young, I'm thinking up north. I mean, there's racism there, but you don't think it's as bad as it is in the South. And then when I moved to Kingston, I'm like, wow, like it's just as bad up here as it is in the South. Granted, I'd never been down South, but just hearing about what down South is like. But moving up here and being up north, you're like, wow, it's just as bad. You see the Confederate flags. Me, I was an athlete. So I always find it interesting, when you had, these, you go to the games, predominantly white stadiums, but Black players, you hear those calls. You hear the names being called, the racial epitaphs that are being screamed at you, and you sit there and you say to yourself, here are a group of people that are I guess cheering you on, but then at the same breath they're still yelling racial epitaphs at you, and I find it very, very, very interesting. And one situation that I had, and this is not even about athletics, this is just about the music. The idea of of white people loving Black culture and loving things that Black people are part of, but don't love the Black people themselves. So, you know, I've always found it interesting. I would walk with some of the school I went to was predominantly white. We had there's a lot of international students, and I think, you know, I can count on my hands how many Black students we had, but it was a good group. We walking with my friends down in Kingston, and a guy drives by in his pickup truck, and is yelling the N-word at us, at me. You know, there was other, but he could be yelling at us. But while he's yelling at it, he's bumping Biggie Smalls in his car. So to me, I'm sitting there. I had to stop for a minute. I'm just like, is this really happening? Is this dude sitting here? He's bumping Biggie Smalls in his car. Biggie Smalls, for anyone else, is an African American, rest in peace, African American rapper from Brooklyn. He's bumping Biggie Juicy song, and I'm like, and this dude is yelling the N-word at me. I'm just like, I'm scratching my head. I'm like, I don't get this. This doesn't make any sense. Like, this dude is bumping Juicy and is yelling racial epithets to me. Okay, it doesn't connect. And then you learn as you get older, you kind of see it more. And then, and like I said, and more being up north, I used to work at Cornell, same thing. Like, you think, oh, the liberal North, like they have a little bit of understanding, they get it. But if you like, no, like, it's just as bad up here than it is in the South, because the Southern, typically, racism is very overt. They let you know, we don't like you. Up here, they won't tell you. They'll smile at you. It's very overt, very subtle things that people do, but it's still there. And then you find out when you're, at your schools, or when you are engaging and talking to people, that, how the racism, really feeling that racism when dealing with people, like, okay, this is just as bad, but they do it a little bit differently than he would somewhere else. So that was my experience. And it's the same experience here, living in Horseheads. Granted, I've been very lucky not to experience anything overt at me, but like I said, it's a lot of overt racism here. Whether you're going, you're at a bar, whether you're at an event. I tell my wife is white. I have a buddy that always texts whenever I go to these events, because you could feel it. You could feel the uncomfort amongst the people you're around. And my wife was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, if you were me, you would understand. And that's part of her privilege, that she doesn't feel it. You can feel the eyes. You can feel a little bit of the tension there. And she's like, what's the problem? Like, I'm like, hon, I can't explain this to you because you're just not gonna get it. But to feel that tension amongst people, like, they suddenly moving away from you, not wanting to talk to you where you at the bar, the kind of the looks, like, why is he here? Kind of looks from people. So those are the kind of things that you experience. So it's not people coming up to you like, you know what, you don't belong here, whites only. It's just, okay, we got a N-word here. Let's kind of, move over to the side a little bit, or let's go on the other side of the bar, other side of the restaurant. Or, the simple fact that if you're being at a restaurant, your service may take a little bit longer. You may not get served. You may get overlooked. I remember being at a bar here on 13 in Horseheads. Was there with a buddy. It was a new restaurant that opened up, barbecue restaurant that opened up. We're there with a friend to check it out, and so let's go support local business. I'm sitting at the bar. It was just me and a buddy, predominantly white people in the restaurant. It's the only white people in the restaurant besides myself and a friend of mine. Young lady is behind the bar, sees us. She sees us. You can't miss us. And continues to walk away and continues to go deal with the white customers. And we waited there for like 15 minutes to get served. And I was there patient. So I was like, you know what? I'm the person that's not going to go to racism first. I don't do that. I prefer not to do that. Everything is not racist. But I'm telling you, I sat there for 15 minutes. We were sitting there and we were overlooked the whole entire time. So she finally came to us. I'm like, listen, miss, we're gone. We don't want any food here. We're not going to support your business. And I was very upset. So part of me wanted to really go at her and whoever was managing, but I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to support this business. I'm going to move on. But part of me in doing all of this, and one of the things that I always get angry at myself about, is that I don't like the the tension and like the drama, or don't want to be seen as an aggressive black person, aggressive black guy. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna let it slide and I'm gonna move on. Because another situation I'm gonna give to you before I leave is another time we at my wife's friend's house for we were watching like a UFC fight. Her friends, she's also white, her boyfriend is white, and also a police officer in Horses. I'm not gonna shout him out. So while we're there, there's about 10 of us there. We're all standing, around, watch this fight. He starts singing whatever song, I forget whatever song it was, but he started using the N-word very like cavalierly, and everyone was dead silent, and just kind of stared at him like, yo, like, what are you doing, dude? And then looked at me just like, Tunde, looking at me like, okay, what's Tunde gonna say? I was upset, and it was part of me wanted to really go at him and make it a teaching moment, but the other part was like, you know what? We all hanging out, we're chilling. I'm gonna let it slide. The problem there is that we are taught to let everything go, let things slide when things need to be confronted at that time, whether it's a teaching moment, however you want to approach it. But we're always taught to let it go, be bigger, take the higher road. That's fine at times, but there are times where the higher road, this person that doesn't deserve the higher road. I'm gonna come at him and let him know what he said was inappropriate, was disrespectful, and was not funny, because when he said it was a joke. It's like, oh, this is ha funny. I'm gonna see what Tunde's gonna say, and I didn't say anything, and that was a teaching moment that I missed out on, and I think about it all the time to myself, that this was a moment that I could have like let this dude know and let everyone know it is not okay. I don't care what song you're singing. It's not okay, one, to say it to me. It's not one to say it to anybody else. All right, so that's I'm gonna leave it on there, leave it right there. But that's my story.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm seeing tons of comments just from the panelists going, yep, this happens to me all the time. Jackie talks about how her family gets ignored. Mary Kay is talking about how those are some of the longest meals ever. Absolutely. And I also wanted to just highlight one piece of this that I think is really important. You were talking about the difference between the way that it's seen in the South and the way it's seen in the North. And I think particularly with where we live, it's really clear to me. They tell us that the Civil War wasn't really North versus South. It was brother versus brother and father against son and those kinds of dynamics. And I don't think that was as clear to me as it is now. I think now it's a lot easier to see because, yeah, you would like to think that coming to New York, you aren't going to see that kind of stuff. And it's definitely here, which is why this conversation in particular is really important. Thank you very much. And
Thank you for having me, Becca. This is awesome.
Absolutely. And the time for us to, just let that stuff slide, that's over. It's not okay. You're absolutely right.
It's been way over.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Jamie, I see that we have some Reverend Ben is kind of just adding in a little bit about stuff that he feels. My cousin is gay is one of the favorite ones he's seen, because that way we can throw that card out there, right? Like, no, that's not okay. Jamie, what kind of comments and questions do we have for this round?
Yeah, so one question from Dorothy Stevens. Dorothy says, is this where I should use my white privilege? And I'm curious, Dorothy, are you referring to like an instance that Babatunde was just mentioning about, the issue of not being served in the restaurant? Is that what you were referring to? And some other...
May I speak on that, Jamie?
Yes, please. Yes.
So I would say in that conversation with the gentleman that was talking about him, the officer using the N-word, I feel like I think, when you talk to Black folks, a lot of them will tell you that they're tired. They're tired of teaching. They're tired of having to be the one to explain to people, this is why you don't do in educating people. So a lot of times, for me, even in a moment like that with those individuals, friends, acquaintances, part of me, even in my mind, was saying, you know what? I'm not going to say anything. I want to see what they say. I want to see how they respond. And no response says enough to me that, you know, you got the looks. So when he made the response, you got the looks from everybody like, oh boy, I can't believe he just said that. But it was the looks. It wasn't anyone like, know what, dude, that is not cool. And I feel like, you know, when you talk about, you know, your white privilege and the opportunity to speak up and stand out and be an ally, those are the moments that you want to say something, you know. And the same thing for my wife when we didn't get served. And that's the white privilege. Like you know, we're thinking that, oh, this person must be really busy at the restaurant. She just didn't realize that, you know, we're here. She has other customers. Like, no, there is there's something there that you're not noticing that we've been sitting here, have not been served, and kind of been walked around. Like at that point, someone has to stand up and say, you know what, let me be the one. Let me let Tunde chill and relax here, and let me step up and say something. So I would say to all my white colleagues, my friends on this call, if in those moments, please, you know, if you have you're out with a black friend, you see that moment, it's a, you know, say to your black friend, just even say it. You know, is it okay that I say something? And if you have that moment, use your voice to make it known that there was something wrong, and it needs to be talked about. So my apologies, Reverend. I see Reverend Ben has something to say.
No, first of all, I 100% agree. And I think there is an element of ownership that comes into that. So homophobia is not my problem, right? It's straight people's problem. Racism wasn't created by the Black community. It's not theirs to correct necessarily all the time. And there is exhaustion. People get exhausted, right? Having to fight for their own basic human dignity. And so, yes, if you have a single ounce of privilege, you should abuse it for good every chance you get. And abuse away, friends. I mean, any time you can. Sometimes abusing privilege in service of justice can be a very sacred thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just wanted to address a comment that came through talking about the ongoing injustices that are being perpetrated against the Native communities. We did get a chance to speak a little bit about that at the beginning, but I just want to hold that up again. And this affects this entire group of folks. Like this is our life that this is happening in, and this is happening to everybody. So those of us with white privilege, absolutely, Reverend Ben, we need to abuse that privilege right now and stand up when the time is right. Absolutely.
And Barbara Smith writes in the comments, it is absolutely appropriate for white people to speak out whenever racism occurs. This is sometimes referred to as interrupting racism. So, do we have time for another question or comment?
Sure. Yep, go right ahead.
Okay, let's see. Nina writes, hearing a lot that Black people are tired of having to explain to us white people, this is our problem to fix. Lots of folks are saying like, yes, someone should have spoken up. So lots and lots of just agreeing comments and grateful comments for everyone's testimonies. Are there, let's see. Anne says, Baba, no matter how long ago that incident occurred, I want to encourage you to revisit it with that police officer and tell him now what you wish you had told him then, and that it's not too late.
I always tell myself that because I do see him often driving past the house. But interesting enough, sad to say, my wife has been very supportive of, mind you, I don't want to shout people out. My wife and her friend, they were good friends. So I think when this whole George Floyd situation started, we were posting a whole lot about police reform, George Floyd, and all of that. And my wife noticed that this person unfriended her. I don't really hear much from the police officer. Mind you that she has other friends that have reached out to her to show their support, and she didn't and her best friend, and her best friend is her boyfriend is the police officer, and we don't hear anything from them. So part of me is like, you know what, do I want to pull him aside and talk to him and let him know, or should I just say, you know what, let this go? It is what it is. Because what's interesting, while outside my house, doing some yard work, I had another Horsehead police officer stop randomly to say, you know what, I didn't know the guy. He said, you know what, I just want to let you know that all police officers are not like this. It was totally unexpected. Never met the guy in my life. Stopped, and we had a conversation for 20 minutes about the whole situation. And I was like, you know what, my man, I love that. The fact that, this other guy that I thought was a friend of mine couldn't even call me and reach out, like, listen, I want to have a conversation with you. To then to have another random police officer out of the blue stop and want to have a conversation to me, that really said a lot. So part of me still says, Jamie still says that, I want to go reach out to him and talk to him. And part of me is like, you know what, maybe that's something, maybe it's a friendship that's not worth, or a acquaintance that's not worth, trying to reconnect with. But from this day on, I can tell you this, I promise, honest to God, that won't happen again. So.
Thank you so much. And one more comment that Reverend Ben wanted to bring up about, so one person in the comments, William Eckert says, noticing that somebody suggested reading Teaching Tolerance. What about the use of the word tolerance? Doesn't it give the feeling of putting up with others to tolerate them versus accepting them? So are there any thoughts from our panelists on this?
Since I called William out, I guess I'll start. Actually, I agree with William. I think tolerance has had its day as a phrase. And part of the reason is because tolerance is sort of like the absolute least you can do is offer tolerance, which is basically, okay, you exist, I'll get over it. I think what we're actually seeking now is a sort of affirmation, a sort of connection, a sort of shared empathy, and a sort of justice that is built on the idea that we're not here just to tolerate each other. We're here to lift up, love, and build up one another. We're here to form God's community. Sorry, it's a preacher. I say God stuff. We're not here to offer tolerance. We're here to offer something much more intense, much more connected, and much more beautiful. And that is the affirmative kind of justice we can give one another, the love, the support, and the empathy that we can share with one another as bearers of the image of God, as human beings living in a space together. So tolerance isn't enough anymore. So I think it's had its day.
Absolutely. Boy, I really appreciate everybody on this panel. I think this has been an incredible discussion. We want to take it a little bit into the what's next segment. So we're going to turn it back over to Ramitha and Babatunde to talk to us a little bit about some suggestions that we as a panel have come up with.
Okay, so we have a list of things, so some books and some community involvement, but I kind of made a little bit of notes as we were going along. First, my little input on about the tolerate, I would say don't tolerate, embrace. This is life. You need to be excited about your life. So to me, I would just go with embrace everyone, all their differences. And I think life will be much better. So also a little comment about the comment about a small voice. One of the comments was, I have a little voice. And I said, to me, I just think that if you have a lot of little voices, you get a loud noise or a loud sound. And so little voices coming together, always speak, even if you feel you have a little voice, because other people around you will hear it. And that might be just what they need to move us forward in this endeavor. So even if you feel that you have a little voice, speak up. People will hear you and others will join you, and soon your message will be loud and clear. Also, not everyone experiences oppression or discrimination the same way. It's important to recognize where the intersections are between racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-immigration actions, and the war on the poor. Listen to people, listen, because often you're not the expert. Other people are teaching you as you go through this. So I would just say, listen. Also, educate yourself through conversation, become aware of your prejudices, question your judgment and reactions to people and situations. What do you know about that person? What are you assuming about that person because of the false narrative you were taught? Listen to the stories of people, not necessarily Black people, or, you know, however you want to categorize them, because at the end of the day, we're all human first. So keep that in mind, that we are all human, and you're listening to our stories to learn from us and for you to become a better person. The teacher who asked about the teachable moment, also I heard that the New York State Union of Teachers, NYSET, has some lesson plans, so you could also look at that. I haven't looked at them, so I have no idea what they are, but I know that they have some things out there for you. Also, don't be afraid to have the difficult conversations. And yes, using your white privilege might lead to difficult conversations, but everyone needs to go there. And I think in society we have, or in American society, it's been stay away from religion and stay away from politics. But I think we need to go there. We need to have those difficult conversations in order to move forward. And as we were just talking about, Tunde was talking about it, I want to say, if you see something, say something. If that works in the airports, I think it also works with racism. So wherever you are, if you see something, say something. So as a group, we've come up with a couple of books to help bring us to a clearer understanding of each other and the system within which we find ourselves. Also remember, racism isn't an accident or one person's failing. It's systemic. It's a system. We need to learn the true meaning of white privilege and use it to help combat racism. Don't read in the circles of your mind also. Talk about your readings and the topics to other people of all colors to get a better perspective. So some of the books that we've recommended, I think there's a list out there also. Tunde will tell you where to find it. Some of the books are Waking Up White and Finding Myself in the Story of Race by Debbie Irving, that was published in 2014. White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo, that was published in 2018. White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide by Carol Anderson, that was published in 2016. The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration and the Age of Color Blindness by Michelle Alexander, that was published in 2010. The Slavery Experience in the United States by Irving Unger and David Ramirez, published in 1970. If reading is your thing, think about getting together with some friends. It adds an element of accountability and also gives you space for some rich conversation. And getting involved in community, Tunde will tell you about that.
Thank you, Ramitha. So getting involved, these discussions are that we have are very important. I was just talking to a colleague this morning that I think that since George Floyd's death, I think I've been in over 10 plus Zoom calls, G chats, or some type of rooms that have been talking about having these discussions. But I think it's not just enough to have these discussions. We need to act and get involved in our community. One of the things that I saw from a lot of people when they saw these things happening was like, oh, I didn't know that this was still an issue. I didn't know this was an issue in our community. I don't know, what do I do? And it's funny, I had to laugh, and I don't want to be terse or mean when I say this, but if let's say you wanted to learn how to I don't know, paint your bedroom or paint a piece of furniture, where do you go? You go to Google, right? and Google will give you a whole bunch of information. So it's always interesting. People are like, I don't know what to do. Go Google it. There's plenty of organizations out there that are doing the work, and you can find those organizations in your community or around the country that are doing the type of work that we need. So I think it's important that we just don't sit. It's important to us to be informed, be educated, so we can inform and educate others. But we also need to do the next part, which is take action, and that can be one, voting. Voting is huge. One of the organizations I'm here is part of in this community is Elmira's Hope Alliance. And that was one of the conversations we had. It's not enough just to have these discussions, but it's paramount to have the representation in our legislative body. People that represent us in the community, people that understand what's going on in the Black community, the Native community, the Hispanic, Latinx community, our poor and impoverished communities. Have people that understand and can speak for us. So voting is huge. Helping people, registering people to vote is huge. You know, giving people the information of who's on the ballot is huge. So you can help people get informed, like, okay, and explain to them, this is the reason why you should vote. Having this person here will help you get some of the policies changed that we need in order to help our poor community, help our communities of color, help our LGBT communities. You know, the voting is important for us. So I will say that's one. And then all about all the organizations. There are several organizations that are doing plenty of great work here locally and then in the country. So what I did with the help of Ramita and all of our other panelists, we made a list of the different groups that are here in the community. I'm gonna give you a couple, but if you're interested, what I did was I made a Google Doc with all of these different groups, their names, their websites, so you can go find their contacts. And also I have the books that Ramita had brought up, and I have a section for articles, TV, and films. So anyone, this is a live shareable document, so anyone can go on, add films on there, add books on there, add local organizations they know. A lot of organizations that are in the document are a lot of local organizations that are here in Elmira and Horsehead area. But if you're up by Syracuse, you're up by Rochester, you may know some organizations there that you're working with that are doing great work. So I'm gonna give you a couple. The NAACP, Elmira and Corning branch, is doing a lot of work. You can participate with that, and their information and website is on the document. EOP, Economic Opportunity Program, does a lot of work. I'm part of one, like I said, the Hope Alliance, the Elmira Hope Alliance, and also part of Program of Peace with Willie Owens, Troy Council, and Jerome Emanuel. They do a lot of work, and they do work. They're directly going into our schools and working with our youth and empowering and mentoring our youth. On top of Willie and Troy having their background in the prison system and working with the local incarcerated youth and inmates that are in and coming out and working with them, they do a whole lot of other work with engaging our youth and making sure they don't end up a statistic. So that's another great program. Man to Man is another good one. Your local colleges, your local university, if a lot of them do have diversity offices, see what they do, see what kind of volunteering help you can offer them, whether it's donating to the program or any of these programs, volunteering. One of the things that we talked about, I had a leadership program with a couple of our young students and local people here a couple of weeks ago. And we talked about leadership styles and different ways to lead and different ways to be involved. Like, you don't always have to be the person that is at the forefront. You don't always have to be the one, the charismatic person yelling or the face of the organization. I always like to be in the background. I like to program manage. So I will, manage a program and manage an event, make sure everything is taken care of. We have our stakeholders together, we have our money together, all of those things. So that may be your part that you play in that organization. So understanding what part you want to play and what you're comfortable with. Like I said, everyone is not comfortable speaking out. A lot of people a lot of people are not comfortable with marching and protesting, and that is fine. But just find other ways that are comfortable to you to help and assist the community, assist these types of programs. So try to figure it out. So like I said, calling and reaching out to those organizations and finding out, what are your needs? What do you need help with? Do you need money? You need someone to help you plan a program? Do you need someone to host an event? There's plenty of ways we can help out. So I want everyone to know that you can do so much for this community, so much for the issues that are going on. All you need to do, pick up a phone, go to your email, and talk to somebody. It's really that simple. And I think a lot of people need to be kind of shown where to go and directed. And like I said, this document will at least give you some of the organizations here locally in Horseheads and in the Myra area. Like I said, if you're out in Syracuse, in Rochester, in New York City, wherever, there are other organizations here. So I will hope, and I ask everyone that's watching and listening, if you could please go to the document. If you know of any great organizations that are doing phenomenal work for our community, please put it on there. Like a lot of times, we don't talk enough about our Native American brothers and sisters. Myself also, I'm like, I want to help. I want to do more for the Native American indigenous community. Where do I need to go? So if you have some great organizations that are there that are helping the native indigenous population here, please put that on there so we know. I know. But like I said, it's all about action right now. We've been talking enough. That's all we've been doing. And not all, excuse me, I apologize for saying that. That's not all we've been doing, but we need to do more. The Poor People's Campaign does a lot of great work. Becca, Reverend Bell, everyone that's here does a lot of great work. So I would say to you, reach out to those organizations, reach out to those contacts and ask them, how can I help? What do you need? And that's what I will leave it at that. Have a great evening. Like I said, the document is shareable, editable. Please go on and add the information on it. Thank you and God bless.
Beautiful. I really appreciate both of you for doing that. We also just want to recommend anybody that's on, one of the things you could think about doing is making a pledge. What are one or two things that you can focus on in the next couple of weeks? Maybe you can begin with a story of a group of people from this land. You can call out racial or marginalizing bullying. And you can have the difficult conversation with a friend about privilege or racism or other sorts of marginalization. And that is incredible. And I am so grateful to everybody on this call. But right now I'm going to ask Ms. Tanisha to join me as we talk a little bit about one of the ways the Poor People's Campaign has created for folks to be active and be able to take a stand today. We're just going to do a brief reading through the open letter to our nation's lawmakers on systemic racism. This was created by the National Poor People's Campaign. An unprecedented wave of protests for racial justice has swept the United States and the globe since the modern-day lynching of George Floyd on Memorial Day. This is radically shifting public opinion about the need to address systemic racism and Black Lives Matter in American public life. But the new nation being born in our streets must reckon with 4 centuries of systemic inequality. The public murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police furnished the spark, and years of police violence caught on cell phone videos stacked up like dry tinder to fuel the fire that rages in our spirits. This is about more than policing. The question before us is whether America can be what it has promised.
The Poor People's Campaign, an call for more revival, is therefore sending this letter to our nation's lawmakers to end systemic racism and implement a reconstruction agenda for our country.
We lift up those who are taking action against police brutality and all forms of violence against Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor people. Our collective public mourning is an expression of outrage, anguish, and pain from these multiple pandemics of police violence, policy violence, and economic violence. We are committed to ending systemic racism, poverty, militarism, climate crisis, and a distorted moral narrative that denies, excuses, and justifies violence against us.
We need sweeping change. The long train of abuses demands it. Too many deaths demand it, and the protests demand it.
We demand that our politicians address the full extent of this violence, not only the police violence that we have been suffering for far too long, for many generations. And I'm going to ask all the panelists to unmute yourselves and bring your videos up so we can read this last line together. Ready?
Somebody's hurting our people
for
far too long.
And
we won't
silence anymore.
Anymore.
Thank you, everybody. This has been a fantastic program, and I am going to turn it over to Pauline to close us out with a song.
Thank you, everybody, so much. So I wanted to lift up that there's many different forms of organizing, and we can also think about creativity in that. And so the Poor People's Campaign, we do a lot of cultural arts work, because we have to remember truth isn't just thought about intellectually, it's felt, it's a feeling. That's another thing that white supremacy has done. It's separated our whole human self. So we're gonna compost this conversation. I invite anyone to kind of journal about some thoughts that come up tonight along the way, and we are going to organize, and we're going to put those thoughts into action. We're going to build a collective analysis. We're going to feel a collective analysis, and we are committed. We are committed until freedom comes. So we're going to start with organize. Oh, and it's call and response, so you don't need to know the words. Okay. Organize, organize, organize. Your turn. Here we go. Woo! Organize, organize, organize. Oh! Organize, organize, organize. Organize, organize, organize. We're getting into step, getting into step, getting into step to win our freedom. Too many years we've been divided, and now's the time to unify. We're getting into step to win our freedom. Woo! We're getting into step, getting into step, getting into step to win our freedom. They tear our children from our arms. A million voices must raise alarm. We're getting into step to win our freedom. We're getting into step, getting into step, getting into step to win our freedom. Too many years we've been divided, and now's the time to unify. We're getting into step to win our freedom. 'Cause we organize, organize, organize. Your turn. Woo! We'll organize, organize, organize. Forward together.
Not one step back. I couldn't get myself unmuted in time. Thank you, everybody. I think this has been a fantastic program. I'm really grateful we were able to do this, and I hope we'll be able to do it again really soon. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.